This video has two parts to it. The first part is discussing what we mean when we're talking about sociological perspectives. What does the term perspective mean, and just a general overview of the different perspectives that we are going to be looking at as part of the A-level course. And then the second part is going to introduce functionalism as the first perspective we're going to look at. So in both parts of the lecture, you are going to need to make sure you're taking notes and using those note-taking grids that you have to help you with this. So if we're looking at what we mean by a perspective is a way of looking at or interpreting the world around us, the social phenomena that we see, that we experience within society. It's the way that we interpret the world. As it says, it's a lens through which sociologists look at the world in order to understand it. It provides a paradigm to use in order to interpret the world around us in this social phenomena. Now, a paradigm is a set of guidelines, a set of rules, if you like, of what things mean and what how to interpret things. So all perspectives will have their own slightly different paradigm, their slightly different way of looking at things in order to interpret the world. So if we're looking at sociological perspectives, they can kind of be grouped into two main parts. The first one is macro approaches, and these are what we refer to as big picture approaches. They're the big ideas. They look at society as a whole rather than the individuals within it. So they're looking at social institutions, they're looking at social groups or social structures within society and trying to interpret those rather than looking at individual people. Now, the macro approaches again can be broken down into two parts. You've got the consensus approach, which is functionalism, that we're going to be looking at a little bit later in this lecture. And consensus means that it's looking at how society works together, how it creates and maintains itself. Whereas the conflict approach is the second set of macro approaches, which are Marxism and feminism, look at how society is in conflict within each other. What are the arguments and the disagreements within society, and how certain groups, also the social structures, are at a disadvantage compared to other groups. So, for example, in Marxism, they're very much linked to the class system. Feminism is looking at gender. The second type of perspective is the micro approaches, and in particular we're going to be looking at interactionism, and this can be broken down into social action theory, symbolic interactionism, phenomenology and ethnomethodology. Now, don't worry too much about this last one. They are two very, very long words, but they are more of a subsidiary perspective rather than one of the main ones. But interactionism as a micro approach looks at the individuals and how individuals interpret the world around them, where our shared rules and ideas comes from, and how we know what to do in certain situations and what not to do, for example. And they look at how our actions are interpreted in social action theory, and in symbolic interactionism, how different body language, different roles and things that we play will influence how our reactions to the world around us and to the social phenomena that we interact and experience on a day-to-day basis. Now, I've also put into the micro approaches modernism or modernity, which looks at modernity, late modernity and post-modernity. Now, technically this is not a micro approach. This kind of doesn't really fit into either macro or micro, because the modernity approach, and particularly post-modernity, kind of takes itself away from this idea of trying to create a universal truth about society. They're not trying to say this is what society is about. They're just trying to give an idea of society and how different people create their own rules, their own norms within society, within the modern world, and how we've moved from modernity, and the debate whether we're in late modernity or whether we've already moved into post-modernity. Okay, so these are the perspectives that we're going to be looking at as part of the A-level course. So over the next few lectures, I'm going to go through each of these, explain what they mean, but they will continue to make more sense as we go into the topics and we start applying these perspectives to specific scenarios such as education, family, and then year 13 into crime and beliefs. Okay, so functionalism then. This is our first kind of perspective. It's also kind of considered the first or the premiere of the sociological perspectives, and it was put forward initially by Comte, but wasn't given the name functionalism by Comte. Comte kind of just talked about sociology as a discipline, and it was only under Durkheim and his contemporaries, Marx and Weber and so on, that we start to see these schisms appear, where we start seeing those different perspectives develop. So Durkheim believed that sociology, much like Comte, was a scientific subject, and that society can be studied scientifically. And he believed that we need to look at the structures of society in order to understand society, to understand the world in which we live. So functionalism is what is considered a structural consensus approach. It's looking at the social structures, education, crime, beliefs, religion, and those kind of, the media, etc., and looking at how they all interact and all work together, hence consensus, to ensure the viability and the continuation of society. So when we talk about functionalism, we're talking about it is a structural consensus approach. It's not looking at the individual, it's looking at those social structures and how they work together for the benefit of society. He also talks about social facts, and what he means by a social fact is something that is an external force or an external control on people's behaviours, where which kind of determine how we act and determine our behaviour and determine who and where we are within society. So Durkheim says that we can identify these social facts or social rules that regulate society in order for its continuation. There has to be some sort of rule, some sort of what's the word I'm thinking of? Some sort of guidance in order for so many people to live together and cohabit within a shared space, i.e. your town, your country, your county, your home, your school. And these can be identified as facts. In the same way that in the natural sciences, we know that chemical A and chemical B will create reaction C. Or if I drop an apple, it's going to fall to the floor because of gravity. We have those sort of scientific facts. So for Durkheim, the study of sociology is about understanding and uncovering these social facts. We talk about it being a top-down theory. And what that means is that the society dictates upon the individual, not the other way around. So that our behaviour, our choices, our lifestyles, all of those sort of things that we kind of assume that we have control over, that we make decisions. What the functionalists are saying was actually we don't have that much choice and we don't have that much autonomy, because everything is dictated by these social structures, which is why we need to study the social structures rather than studying the individual. And functionalism is very positive. As a consensus approach, it's looking at how social phenomena, social structures, social institutions, all of these things work for the benefit of society, how they work to ensure society continues and society maintains itself. So it's a very positive way of looking at things. One of the ways I remember it is always thinking about the functionalists being happy clappy hippies. Everything's wonderful and rose tinted glasses, and isn't the world a beautiful, wonderful place that we're all doing wonderfully well in? Yeah. We'll come to the problems with that view in a minute. Okay. So Talcott Parsons came along later. He came along after Durkheim, and he was around in about the 1940s, 1950s. And he developed Durkheim's idea of this interconnection between different social institutions. And he used the term organic analogy to try and show how the social institutions interact with one another and support one another with it to maintain social cohesion, to maintain society, to keep everything ticking along nicely in that happy, clappy, joyful, hippie kind of way. And he identified 3 ways that society is very much like the human body, hence organic analogy. The first is this idea of systems. Society and the human body are systems of interconnected and interdependent parts which function for the good of the whole. So just like in our bodies, when one of our organs no longer works properly, we become ill and we can possibly die. So we have to take medication or get an operation or seek some sort of restorative process to get us back to being fully functional humans. Now, Parsons said that this was the same within society as a whole. So when one social institution perhaps isn't functioning to its best, then as a society we need to look at what's wrong with that institution and make changes. And those changes should happen slowly and gradually, because too much change too quickly can create what Durkheim referred to as anomie, which is when you have confusion over what is normal and what is not normal, and what are you supposed to do, what you're not supposed to do, and that can lead to even more problems within society and eventually society's downfall. So Parsons talks about these systems as not only showing us when something's not quite right, but also showing us how society stays together, or how these social institutions all work together to be able to maintain social cohesion, and that there's no one thing in and of itself that keeps society together. It's this interconnectedness and interdependent nature of the social institutions that keep society functioning and alive, if you like, if we're taking this kind of anamorphic view. He also states that just like the human body, these systems have certain needs. The body needs oxygen, it needs food, it needs fluids. Without these things, we die, quite simply. Now, society doesn't necessarily need oxygen, food and fluids. It needs its own things, which are slightly less tangible. And this was referred to as the Gale schema, or functional prerequisites. So it's remembered using the acronym GALE, or sometimes you see it as AGILE, but that makes no sense to me. Why don't you just use GALE? It's a name, it makes sense. But these are the functional prerequisites of society. Every society needs these 4 things in order to maintain itself, in order to keep going. Without them, it will die. So the first one is what he referred to as goal attainment, sometimes referred to as the political function. And what Parsons means by this is society needs to set goals and make decisions about how power and economic resources are allocated. Now, in terms of modern society, we are very much a capitalist society, and we have determined that we are a democratic capitalist society in the UK, and so we have decided that power is determined through elections, and economic resources are allocated by what you earn. If the more you do, or the more higher level your occupation, the more you earn, the more economic resources you have. The second is adaptation, and this is sometimes referred to as the economic function. Every society has to provide for the needs of its members in order for the society to survive. So societies need to change. They need to adapt to their surroundings. So in primitive societies, they may have to move to a more fertile area if they're unable to support the food requirements for their society. So they may need to move to an area where there is more fresh water, for example. In modern society, we see societies having to change, having to adapt in order to function on a global stage, in order to ensure that its members are able to get everything they need. So this could be through international agreements, it could be joining certain international groups, things like that, in order to ensure that citizens have the things that they need. They have the food that they need, they have the clean water that they need, they have the jobs that they need, and that allows society to continue. We then have integration, which is also referred to as the social function or social harmony side of society. And what Durkheim states is that societies need to create specialist institutions to help to reduce conflict within society. For example, education and the media creating a sense of belonging, religion creating that sense of belonging. But there also needs to be outlets for aggression, if you like. So sports, for example. I mean, boxing. Take boxing, for example, or any of the martial arts. Pretty aggressive. But if you've got these socially accepted means of getting rid of your conflict, getting rid of your aggression, then society can be more more in harmony. Harmful? No, that's not even a word. More in harmony and more happy clappy hippie. Okay, and the final one is latency, and these are what are the unstated consequences of actions. And Parsons identified two types of latency: pattern maintenance, which are ways of maintaining the value consensus, and through socialization and tension management. So and the second one being opportunities to release tension in a safe way, so which links back to that integration and social harmony. So it might be that the education, the purpose of education is to create a next generation of workers for the economic need, to keep society moving forward, but the latent function, the kind of unintended function of education is to create pattern maintenance, is to create the value consensus, because we're taught this is what you should be wanting in life, this is what you should be aiming for in life, these are the rules of society. Okay, now the third and final part of the organic analogy is functions, and this is where we go back to that idea of the social institutions being like the organs of the body, in that just as the organs of the body work for the good of the whole, so do social institutions. And as our organs have evolved over time, for example, the appendix, we don't actually need our appendix, we just still have one. So the social institutions evolve and change over time to meet the needs of society. And Parsons referred to this as structural differentiation. So social institutions will adapt and change, and the functions of those institutions will move and change the institution that they're part of in order to better maintain society. For example, but prior to like the NHS and things like that, medical care was part of the family institution. Your family would look after you when you were sick. Now we have the NHS, in the UK anyway, or the healthcare institution of society. That's where we go to when we're sick. When we don't necessarily rely on our families. There's still an element of reliance, but not as much anymore. We're not relying on our families to cure us or anything like that. We have the healthcare system to do that for us. So for Parsons, society maintains this consensus, maintains this social cohesion and social solidarity through this idea of the organic analogy. Now, when we look at functionalism, I mean, let's face it, you can even immediately kind of go, yeah, I'm not quite sure about this one. There are elements of it that are still useful, and there are elements that we can see, yes, that works. I can see that in the society in which I live. But Robert K. Merton was an internal critic of functionalism. And what that means is he agreed in general with the functionalist idea. He agrees with the idea of social facts and the top-down approach, and that society is in consensus. But he said, particularly of Parsons' organic analogy, that there were problems. The first being the idea of indispensability. Parsons puts forward the idea that all social institutions are indispensable, and that there are without them society will crumble. Now Merton says that that's not actually true. If we really think about it, that's not actually true, and that not all social institutions are functionally indispensable, that there are alternatives. And he even points out that Parsons says it himself through this structural differentiation theory, that when we aren't able to use a particular social institution for a particular function, it passes on to someone else. And he uses the example of the family and primary socialization. So this idea that the family is the initial group that teaches us the norms and values of society. They teach us how to behave. So saying please and thank you, not picking your nose in public, not running around naked in public. Your own home, your business, do what you want. But you can't run around the supermarket with no clothes on. Although I'm sure small children have done that. I wouldn't be surprised. But that primary socialization doesn't necessarily have to come from your family. There are children who are brought up in care, for example, or who are get their primary socialization perhaps from nursery or childcare providers, as their parents need to work. So the family is not indispensable when it comes to primary socialization. Secondly, he argues about functional unity. So Parsons argues that all the social institutions are all happy, clappy, joyful, working together, everyone loves each other, and it's all wonderful. Merton's kind of going, no. Not all social institutions are as tightly linked as Parsons suggests. Some institutions are quite far removed from others. For example, there is very little link between finance and healthcare. in the UK, okay, we have the National Health Service, so we don't have to worry about paying for our healthcare. We kind of do through national insurance, but that's a completely different subject and different lecture, and we'll move on from that. But the financial system can still function without healthcare to a certain extent. There is a link. Obviously, the healthcare system keeps workers healthy so they can work in the financial institutions, but it's not completely reliant upon the other. Okay. And the third one, he talks about universal functionalism. He's talking about this idea that not every institution of society performs a positive function. Sometimes there is dysfunction. Okay. And what he means by this is sometimes the family, not family, that's my example. Sometimes a social institution can have a negative impact on society or the people within it. And he uses the example of the family. The family is not always functional for everybody. There is dysfunction in the family. You have domestic abuse. You have families that just don't like each other. You can love your family, doesn't mean you have to like them. Education system, not everyone's going to come out of the education system with the best education. Maybe they were bullied, maybe they just didn't quite get it, maybe it wasn't that they're not as academic, they're more vocational. And the education system is trying to almost be one size fits all, and we'll look more at that when we look at education. But we can see that there is dysfunction. They're not always positives for society. And finally, he talks about the manifest and latent functions. So manifest functions are the intended function of the institution. And generally this is the positive side of the institution. So, for example, a manifest function is primary socialization within the family. The family's role in society is to socialize the next generation. It's also to create the next generation, but we'll talk more about that when we talk about family and households. But the latent function is to kind of keep everyone together. Although it is that socialization, the family, the kind of latent function of the family is social control, if you like, because if you don't meet the needs of or perform the norms and values as society dictates, your family is one of the first people to kind of say, don't do that. No, you don't do that. Don't run around the supermarket naked. Don't pick your nose. You say please and thank you. They're the kind of that first line of defense or the first line of punishment if you don't follow the norms and values of society. Okay. But Merton's not the only critic. All perspectives will be criticised by the other perspectives, because each perspective is kind of going, we've got the truth. We know what the truth is. We know what society is like. So that when they look at the other perspective, they're going, yeah, you got that wrong. Yeah, you got that wrong. It's almost like a bunch of bickering people. I know the truth and your truth is not the right truth, kind of thing. So, first of all, we'll look at the logical criticisms of functionalism. So these are the criticisms that we can look at it without even being a sociologist and kind of going, yeah, well, not quite sure about that one. So the first one is quite a long word. The idea that functionalism is teleological. And what this means is that something exists because of its function or effect. So, for example, they're saying that the family exists in order for primary socialization, in order for the creation of the next generation. So, did the family exist to meet the function, or does the function exist to did the function come in because of the institution, which is kind of confusing. I get that. But this idea that functionalism is teleological is the idea that the social institutions exist to meet a function in society. But these functions are always changing, but our institutions don't so much. We don't get new institutions very often. Okay. The second criticism is the theory is contradictory. How can something be both functional and dysfunctional? How can a family be functional for society but also, sorry, how can the family be good for society but at the same time be bad for society? It, again, doesn't quite make sense. And finally, it is unscientific. And again, this links into that contradictory. Functionalism, Durkheim said that sociology is scientific and it should be treated in the same manner as the natural sciences. But one of the key components of something being a science is that it is verifiable or falsifiable. So it can either be proven true or it's open to being proven wrong. Now, as a theory, you can't do that with functionalism. You can't prove it undeniably right, but you also can't prove it wrong. So it's not scientific, which is contradictory because Durkheim says that functionalism is scientific. Okay, see what I mean? Not straightforward. Secondly, you've got the conflict approaches. So this is the Marxist feminists' approach, criticisms of functionalism. And their biggest one is the fact that it is overly positive. It sees the world through rose-tinted glasses, happy, clappy, joyful people. So it's ignoring any form of conflict within society. It's also considered conservative, and that's, although it's got a capital C, it's small c conservative, not Conservative Party conservative, as in maintaining the status quo. The functionalist perspective is about maintaining society, maintaining the social cohesion, maintaining social solidarity. Change should be gradual, change should be slow, so that we don't end up with anarchy. So it's quite kind of like this. It's almost like saying this is how it's always done and this is the way it should be. And it legitimizes the power of the powerful. So it's saying that these people are in power because they're meant to be there. So it's overly positive. It's saying everything is wonderful when it's not wonderful. People don't necessarily have a good experience within society. And it's maintaining the status quo, maintaining the power with those who already have it. We then get the action approaches or the interaction approaches who criticise it. And their first criticism is that it is deterministic. Now, this is a key word that you do need to remember. And what that means is it's taking away agency from the individual. As an individual, I don't have control over my behaviour, my life course, or my choices. Society is dictating them to me. So if that's the point, if that's the way it is, well, what's the point of imagining that? It's almost like fatalism and saying that my life course is already set out for me because of who my parents are, because of where I come from, because of my gender, because of my religion. And all of these social institutions have put me on a path that I am then going to follow. When, in fact, I can change things. My parents didn't go to university, I did. My parents didn't actually see the point in university, but I did. My family are very much get married, have children. I don't have either. Don't really want them either, but that's beside the point. So it's about saying that the fact that this theory is saying that I don't have choice, or I don't have very many choices. My choices are dictated to me by the society in which I live and the institutions and structures to which I belong. It also rarefies society. Okay, and what that means is it turns society into a tangible, distinct thing. Rather than it being a concept, it's a thing. okay? And you can't touch society. You can't manipulate it. Well, you can, but not really. It's more, according to the action approach, it's more of a concept. It's society is a creation. It's not naturally occurring. And finally, we've got the postmodernists. Now, the postmodernists, they're always going to say that these structural approaches, the macro approaches, are outdated. They are a meta-narrative that is ignoring diversity. If we go back to this idea that our choices and everything are dictated to by our institutions, if we're all receiving the same socialization and the same social values, and we're all agreeing on those and creating that value consensus, we'd all be the same. And we're not. We have lots of different family types. We have lots of different people doing different things with their lives. So it can't be the way that functionalists are telling us it is. We have people having different lifestyles. We have nudists who like to walk around their private property naked. We have different religions. We have different family structures. We have different education systems. So there can't be that value consensus. And therefore, functionalism is outdated because it doesn't have the truth. The society which I see and the society which you see, or the society I experience and the society you experience, can be two different things. So therefore, functionalism is not useful.